THC is basically it's mimicking anandamide. I'm saying that correctly, right? Because that's what's supposed to be going into that receptor site.
Yes.
And THC kind of looks like that.
Yep.
As far as your body can tell.
It looks
so that's
very
why
similar.
the THC will gladly take up that receptor place. And then the anandamide, when it doesn't have anywhere to go, it ends up just being reabsorbed by the body or just it's gone.
Absolutely.
Right?
So you make these naturally, right? We have them. They're in your body. We can see them being used. And when we supersede any of the body's mechanics, the body says, well, I don't need to make this anymore. It's always here. At first, you'll have more and more receptors, which is why as you first drink alcohol, it gives you a little bit of a buzz.
The greater the response for the smaller quantity, right?
Absolutely. And then as your body adapts, it then gets to kind of a flooded state where it doesn't, you've got a whole bunch of receptors listening for this, the presence of this messenger, and that doesn't signal the volume it did at the beginning because there's so many. And then your body actually stops making or makes very few of its own natural forms. So when patients stop marijuana or alcohol or cocaine or nicotine, all of these are very similar processes in any addictive process, but specifically with the marijuana, when they stop marijuana and they just say, gosh, doc, it's been 4 weeks and I still feel so terrible. And that's sad, but true that it takes... The depletion is so profound when during that marijuana use, in part because of that fat solubility, the chronic inflammation in the areas of the brain that are very important for the development of teenagers. I mean, it is specific to the hippocampus, to the thalamus, and to your cerebral area or cerebellar area, which is a big part of balance. And there's several other ones, but those are the biggest ones where we say it is very potent receptors that the growth of that in a teenager gets blunted, doesn't get delivered, and now you have the consequences that they will have to try and shoot cleanup and catch up that development. But you only get that opportunity if they do not have swelling in the brain for 6 months.
Wow.
And so this begins the sequence to say, well, as I look at the different conversations I've had with parents who've said, I'm helping my son. He has anxiety. I give him marijuana and he did better on the test. I said, your study is 3 weeks long or 6 weeks long, whatever it is they've been doing this to their kid. Right. And I said, let's just go to the you can go to, several studies have come out saying, look at the brain development for people in those teenage years, in those adolescent years that chronically use them. Watch to see that they never reach their peak potential for the maturation of a human brain. They just tap out. And then at 26, it caps off. You can't fix it at 26. Wow. After that certain, think of 26th birthday.
It feels to me sometimes, too, that people will stop at nothing to find a stat or a study or something that backs up their belief system, regardless of how good or bad it is.
Oh, absolutely.
So they might be fairly naive to effects of things or fairly well educated, at their own, amateur level of education compared to somebody like yourself. And they will stop at nothing to find the data that backs, I found this study that said this, and that's contrary to what you have come to understand. I'm sure you've come across some of these things. Now, is this good research? Is this credible research? Is there, give me, what are the, other than the fact that I can understand somebody that's in their waning years dying of pancreatic cancer, and they're in awful pain. Perfect. If they want to smoke marijuana to overcome pain, it's a pain tolerance measure at this point, right? That all for it, right? Because you basically have something that has a life sentence. You're not going to survive.
Right.
So if you can overcome these last dreaded months on Earth with some pain tolerance, then have at it. But I'm finding it hard to believe, watching your stuff, listening to you, just finding out more about it, because I was really naive and I didn't know that much. I got to be honest. I haven't spent much time in my life researching the impact of marijuana on the body. And I just took it at kind of face value, superficial information from what's out there floating in the universe. But what's a good argument for a positive effect of marijuana on the body, anywhere on the body?
Yeah, it's really difficult to talk about that. I'll look at the several levers that you can pull in the prescriptive nature of helping somebody with a brain problem.
Yes.
And I point out that, because I've had every argument. I've done public forums, and then you get this long line of people that want to have every question answered. And there are all of these contested and very popular mantras on why marijuana should be offered. So let's start with a couple things. First of all, if you look at the amount of THC in marijuana, I want to point out that the marijuana in the 1970s and 1960s.
I wrote this down. Good, I found this intriguing. Will you?
I'll say it out loud. So the Woodstock, there was less than 1% of that marijuana joint was THC. When you get to the early 1970s, the best weed had 3%. 3% of THC in it. As you get closer into the later 80s, you had 15%. Kush Chronic was a brand name of a strand.
I actually, I was not on the drug scene in the 80s, right? I was I was 5 to 15 years old through the 80s. But I remember that term, Kush Chronic. Yes. I remember Chronic. I don't know if it was in music. I think it was probably. Music artists singing about it. Yeah.
Well, today's plants, you cannot even compete in the world of today's marijuana plants if you don't have in the high 30% THC in
30 times what it was back in Woodstock.
Absolutely. And then it gets worse as you take them and move them into extracts, which become they're very strange looking. So without the education to, again, very young brains being exposed to this, it looks, one of them's called wax. And I just think, I clean out people's ears for a living. It looks exactly like wax.
They do. I saw the images. Yeah, we'll make sure we get that in the video for sure. It does. It looks like nasty, what you do not want in your body. But
you can, I really drive home when you look at it, you can see that it's fat-based.
Yes.
It is a fat-based molecule that you are going to put in that body. And now you look at the way that they have made hybrids, which is combinations of these, and you have 99% THC in the leaves, in the substances, whether it's not a leaf anymore, whether it's a hybrid. And that's a powerful difference between what was 1% versus now almost 99% is THC.
It's ridiculous. It's kind of, would it be a good analogy would be like 4% alcohol beer?
Yes.
Which is like what I drink. Guinness is like one of my favorite beers in the world. I love it. That's my favorite beer. It's not even close. And that's like 4 or 4.5% alcohol. It's very mild, actually, and I just love it, right? And I have some at home in my fridge, and maybe I'll have one tonight. But then you have really heavy duty. What's the stuff that people make? Moonshine type stuff. And what's that?
Yeah, 100%. That's alcohol. 100% alcohol.
That's like all the way as far as you can go. You can barely sniff that stuff without falling over. It
gets in your brain with the inhalation of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So would that be comparable?
Yeah, that's exactly where the studies that you look at for when you have people quoting this, there isn't a study of more than, the highest one that you can find is 20% THC.
Oh my gosh, right.
Nobody's looked at things, most of them are 10% or less of the THC is what they're studying. And so you have these mild deliverances. It's why that presentation by the undercover cop, he wasn't a cop, but undercover military was so powerful to watch. Well, we don't do a study. Show me what's going on in their community, and then watching to see over the generations of the last 5 years and the 5 years before that and the 5 years before that in towns across Colorado, how many of the brains were underdeveloped? How many of them had the anxieties? How much of that impact was learning disabilities and the dramatic increase in those school populations when compared to the rest of the country. And so when I first point out that for the studies that people are quoting are done with lower amounts of marijuana or lower amounts of THC. I also, people will then bring up saying, well, I have this study where, they look at CBD. Well,
I was just going to get there because then there's going to be like, okay, well, I just do CBD oil. Right. I just do CBD gummies or whatever. Mm-hmm. I actually had a company that sent me free stuff. Mm-hmm. To like test and and I was just like, oh well, CBD, it's become so accepted, right? Mm-hmm. It's healthy, it's good for us, right? But I don't want to interrupt you, but it's just it's become something in our business in the health and fitness industry. CBD has paired very nicely and become a multi-million, maybe billion-dollar industry here in recent years, and very accepted in the world of health and fitness as something positive and good for you.
Absolutely. So, and you look at the theory of that, the CBD should be the euphoric side of that molecule. It should not cause that psychoactive effect. When you're looking at the chemistry inside a textbook, it should do that. It should be non-psychoactive. But then did you happen to take any of them?
I did.
And did you feel a lift of a settled mood or any?
Do you know what I made the mistake of doing? The only time I took it was like within an hour of going to bed.
Okay.
Thinking that maybe it'll help me just relax and fall to. Of course, I've never had trouble sleeping. Like I'm a good sleeper. I lay down and I'm asleep within minutes.
Okay.
So I don't know what effect it had on me. I wouldn't even know what feedback to provide to this company. They're like, here, we'll give you some free samples. Maybe you can make some YouTube videos about like our product. Okay. And I'm like, sure, no problem. I don't even know what I would say. I took your gummies and I fell asleep. I always fall asleep. So I don't know, what is happening chemically when you take these?
Well, so I think that the advertisement and what the theory is that it will do it will bind to those receptors that are not that don't have a psychoactive component, that do not stimulate the psychoactive. But again, this undercover provider, the other part of his job was to go get samples of CBD and send them to the National Institute of Health, that specific lab where it's, nobody's, it's very secure. It's not a third-party validation, which happens to have ownership in whatever. It's a
right. There's no
associated conflict. Right.
Exactly.
And in the Midwest, this is where all our presentations were. This was something he would get a report 4 times a year. So you have 4 reports. Each time the report would come back with over 20 samples, and it was supposed to be CBD. So there should be no THC, no active drug in it. He had the data for the last 6 years, and of those 4 points of data for 6 years, there were 2 times where he found samples that did not have THC in it. So let's just do that. 20 times 4, that's 80. Times those 4 times, that's 240 samples in that year, over 6 years. And now he has 2 examples where the sample he sent into the lab did not have THC in it.
Less than 1%.
Yeah. So the part that I when people talk about that, I just keep thinking, what do you want from what are you trying to get from CBD? What's your motivation?
Right.
Because I'm guessing there's about a million other ways we can help you with this that don't put you at risk for the toxicity, the infusion of a molecule that is known to be in the plant at the beginning, that they are doing whatever scientific process to get it removed. And of course, everybody's advertising says, we don't have THC. We don't have THC.
Yes.
But do a drug test on yourself. THC will stay in your fat cells for 30 days. It will especially if you're taking this on a routine basis.
Or even longer, right? As you said, up to 3 months.
That's brain cells. So,
that's
for
brain.
Sure. Yeah.
So the fat in your brain versus the fat in your body, a little different.
Right. Well, and I actually think that there's similar residency times in both of those fat, but they don't turn the urine positive after about maybe about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how fat you are, actually.
Wow.
So the amount of fat in your body will change how much of the volume it holds, which will then say how much ended up in the urine.
So skinny people can get away with drug tests a little bit better than obese people.
Absolutely.
Which is, I learned something new.
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned a lot new, actually, on this topic in recent days. But okay, very interesting, very interesting.
I would still, don't bet your job on it.
Right. I'm not. I mean, I'm not I'm such a vanilla guy in a lot of ways. Like, I don't to me, it's like having a couple of beers. That's me stepping out.
Oh yeah.
That's me living large these days. Yeah.
Sometimes I think that's the wisdom that shows up years after doing things that you're like, okay,
that's true.
Let's just, that doesn't play forward
very well.
Done.
Yeah. I did enough stupid stuff. I learned that stupid is stupid. It's not, and it's oftentimes not even fun because of the consequences of it. So,
well, I think that's where you get back to when people say, "Well, I use CBD for this, and I use CBD for this, or
sure.
I give it to my child for this," and I'm like, why would you take that risk when you look at how often it is tainted with something that will change the brain development of that child, of that person, and of you? I mean, that ability to repair a brain.
Wow.
When I look at patients who are coming in and they are chronic users, and again, peak brain performance is what I'm after, and as I go through the list of substances, they'll fight really hard to hold on to that marijuana.
Yeah.
It's a very tender moment to say, you're going to have a crappy life for a couple of months here because of how long you've been on it, how difficult it is to restore some of these endogenous production lines of neurochemicals that are specifically blocked by THC, but then also in association, like their dopamine production gets worn out, their noradrenaline is depleted, so their overall brain health is riddled with these consequences of essentially chronic swelling, chronic brain injury from the use of that.
And the scans that you have provided, which I love that. That's how you start it.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you show healthy brain, and then you show a brain that's riddled or pocketed or missing parts, and you're saying, okay, what do you think's happening here, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other gentleman that was part of it or whatever put out some guesses or some feedback that was happening in it live from some people responding, and okay, that's Parkinson's, or that's Alzheimer's, or that's alcohol abuse, or that's drug abuse, or whatever. And it's really like, whoa. And some of the brains were young.
So young.
It's like 20-year-old brains with like missing parts.
Yeah, that you were like, oh. I mean, and as I look at their treatment plans for how do I help this person get back onto the path where they can, the human brain is amazing. It can repair when you give it the right setting.
Yeah.
You might not be able to grow your hippocampus any longer, but you can fill in those blanks. You can really reactivate. There are several things that we can do that we know are not mythical. We have really solid evidence for improving how that brain works, how to get that peak brain performance out of their lives again. But it begins by stopping the swelling, which means no alcohol, no marijuana. The alcohol, you swell your brain for that 48 hours, but the marijuana, you swell it for 12 weeks as it hangs out in those extra fat places of your brain. And when you say these, flippantly say this to a patient who's never heard any of this, many times they just get up and walk out. They just feel so overwhelmed that they...
Yes.
So I don't lead with that anymore. Yeah. I don't want them to get up and
people,
walk
because people don't right out of the gate want to hear what they can't do anymore when it's something that they've invested a lot of energy and time in and really enjoy. It's like telling that woman that you really shouldn't be drinking 3 glasses of wine every night,
Right.
And okay, maybe lead in with hey, maybe we try cutting back to 2.
Right.
You know, and it's kind of like, let's get there, but let's get there very slowly, you know. You had mentioned this earlier, and I just wanted to get back to when you mentioned a functional MRI. And I know a lot of people listening have heard of an MRI before. Tell me, it's so cool because you said in your webinar, watch us think. It's basically you're able to see how the brain works in real time with a functional MRI.
So the best, if you've ever watched the show House, the Dr.
Yes,
House.
of course. Yeah,
okay?
I know exactly.
So they always use functional MRIs on that, telling the stories thing. And I remember when I was just learning about this, and this was the first few years of House I'd watched, where they were having a patient under the functional MRI. And of course, this was storytelling, but then it happened in reality in my own life, like a month later. And it was just like, oh, that wasn't fake news. But they had asked the patient to play the piano or practice. He plays the piano. He had had a brain injury, and they said, I want you to pretend to play the piano. And you could see the part of his brain that was hyper developed, and he was playing the piano in his mind.
Wow.
It was super cool. But the places that are a little easier to understand is I like to use a second language. So if you, I'll usually pick an audience member to help me with this, saying, you know, if I put you under a functional MRI and I put a smell under your nose, I would ask you to tell me, well, what is that smell?
What's the memory, right? Because the olfactory system is highly connected to memory.
Amen. Yes.
More so than any other sense we have, right?
And it's so superficial, so it's right there, and that's a short little connection because of the proximity. Yeah, very good. And when you look at the functional MRI, you can watch to see them thinking about what is the smell, because we store our smell memories in a specific area. But as soon as this other place in your brain lights up, we now know that you have a word that links to that smell. And so we can see it like, oh, but before we let you trigger the muscles of your mouth and tongue and throat to speak the word, we say, wait. Do you speak a second language? And in my little example, they always say yes.
Yeah, right, of course.
Like, I want you to think about this, what this is. I want you to describe this smell with that other language. And then you can see a different area of their brain light up. It highly overlaps with the first language. And we can tell by where that space lines up relative to the first language what age you were when you learned the second language.
Wow, that's cool.
Right?
So if you grew up in a household speaking two languages, right? Say your one parent spoke Spanish, your other parent spoke English, and they encouraged both languages. Yep. You could tell, from a very young age, this kid was bilingual.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And if you try to learn that at like 40,
you take a lot more.
You might have a tumor outside.
Take a lot more brain power to learn a second language as an adult, right?
And you can see that on functional MRI. So I just think that's a great way to say, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we can see. So that's the function of it. But the other part that I've always been very interested in was the division of cells within the human brain. In my medical school training, which isn't, I graduated from medical school in 1998, and the test questions all said, the brain cells you're born with are all you get. You don't get to make more. You prune, you take them away, but you do not get to make any more.
This is what I've heard.
Right?
Yeah, that's what I always heard. You're not going to get more brain cells, so don't kill them off or whatever, But there are stem cell-like effects inside the human brain, and we know that through what functional MRIs have taught us, and then diving in and harvesting them post-mortem to then grow. How can we make that stem cell effect of the hippocampus is one of the areas that you can make a cell like a cell. Now, you can't grow it longer, but you can fill in those holes. I was talking about earlier that if you have an injury to the hippocampus, it's slow going. It's a difficult, slow recovery. But you can make hippocampal cells from other hippocampal cells as long as the brain chemistry is right, as long as it's not swollen, as long as you're getting good deep sleep. The other place that you can make that cell is your smell. The floor of the fourth ventricle is linked to your smell. So again, it can regenerate those cells. As long as you have one left, you have the potential to make more stem cells. Wow.
Yeah. So I think those are great little, here's the advancement in medicine. That's just one place in medicine where it really has advanced. But functional MRIs have taken us from, really thinking of the brain as this very stagnant. This is all this part of the brain does, to really blowing our minds about how interconnected the human brain is, and how much our decisions are linked to emotion and human relations, and impacted by our own experiences, and that maps into a certain sense of your brain.
And how does THC now play into what we were just talking about in terms of that signaling, and how all of that would the process of that happening? Because THC can create a little bit of a barrier there in that scenario that you were painting there, with thinking of a memory associated with a smell. Okay, now think about that in a second language and all of this thing, right? And then where these thoughts are going, and they come up, they start bumping into a barrier here, right? The
Absolutely.
THC wall, so to speak.
So you can see that the places where that THC deposits in those extra fatty layers, it lines up in several of the places of the hippocampus, and then that deeper part of the brain. But this is also the highway where the messages from thinking about something and speaking something show up. Now, there are other places, but this is a perfect way to teach that. So in my workshop, I'll put on Cheech and Chong.
Yeah, sure.
And you can hear that their cadence is slower and their tone is monotone.
Wow,
Okay.
it's true.
It's real. And, we all laugh because they look rather intelligent. They look like they should know.
Amen.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And you're like, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with their brain. I mean, what makes it funny is it's this incongruence of what you see and then what you're hearing. And then it makes you laugh because that doesn't match. Something doesn't match. And when you're watching under a functional MRI, when they go to describe when they go to use a word, you'll see the message hit an area where there's a large deposit, a large amount of that THC blocking the route, and your brain is pretty smart. It's going to keep trying to go around it, but it takes time. And so, one of the places where you can pretty universally see the impact of marijuana is that the cadence of their speech will have an elongation between each beat, and that you can hear the deflections that I put in my speech. If a marijuana user thinks about it, they can do that. But their default, what they do without thinking, it doesn't have.
If they try really hard, they might do well for a little while.
Right, they can concentrate and perform, but that is not what happens in their default speaking. Their default speaking becomes a slowed cadence and a muted range of deflection, and so that's where they get the monotone and they get the slower amounts. And to watch that on a functional MRI, it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, I get it.
Right.
Like, that's this chronic deposition of a substance that doesn't belong there. I mean, opiates don't do that. Alcohol doesn't do that. Cocaine doesn't do that. They're not fat soluble. The fat solubility of this not only puts it in the way of these functions, but then it transfers that pathology of swelling that area of the deepest part of the brain, which then becomes so difficult to get it to repair again, especially when they've been doing it for years.
Wow. Yeah. So there's probably not much out there for someone, say an abuser or somebody with high levels of THC over prolonged periods of time who then stopped.
Right.
Is there much data out there for how their brains recovered or rebounded from that?
I like to tell the story. So I've had a lot of patients over the years, and sometimes I didn't get to choose them. The judge chose them. But when you have one of the highest, very prominent member of the community in the marijuana world in my town of South Dakota, ends up in my clinic because he's in his early 40s and he has lost continence of his bowels and bladder, and he cannot be contained, but he's not violent. He's just lost his intelligence. And so he ends up in a nursing home.
Well, at 40?
At 40. But what's unique about the nursing home is, he can't smoke marijuana there.
No.
And so he detoxes. And of course, I do him on rounds. I see him on rounds, and as I watch him over the months, he's definitely getting clearer. And then one day, it was about 6 months in, he was just gone. He ran away, I'm sure.
Got you.
Not gone dead, no.
No, he was just gone. I'm like, how gone?
Right. But what's powerful is, you look at the timeline that it takes. He had a huge history of marijuana, and he was very passionate about how healthy it was for him until he could not reason. He couldn't reason through it.
It's so healthy, I can't even hold my bladder, or I poop in my pants. It's so good for me, though.
Right. You're like, oh my gosh, it was the most pathologic. In fact, I didn't even give him full credit that it was all from that. I thought he must have had a head injury. Maybe there was a toxicity of he was on other medications that might have caused it, and those had been stopped. So it might have been a combination that we did stop anything that might have caused it, but we had no good answers. And he didn't have a good support system, so he ends up in a state-funded nursing facility instead of a jail, which I do think was the right place for him to be, because he wasn't violent. He was just not cognitively advanced anymore. So his return to society, though, I think he went back to doing what he knew how to make money at.
He did what he wanted to do, regardless of... Listen, cigarette smokers, there can't be one cigarette smoker out there who will make an argument that it's good for them.
Right.
They just do it because they enjoy it, and they know at some level it's killing them, and it's not good for them, and it's destroying their lungs, and it's destroying their cardiovascular system. It's not good for anything in the body. Nothing. It does zero good for you. Yet millions of people will continue to smoke, and they will make an argument for at least why they are allowed to or should be allowed to or whatever, but at least they're doing better in public areas of banning it.
Right.
Which I'm a huge advocate of. You shouldn't be able to just walk outside a public place and just light up and smoke and blow it right in people's faces at the grocery store. I got my kids with me, and by the way, they don't want to breathe that crap either. You know what I mean? So listen, I'm a health and fitness guy. I'm not a stage-ready bodybuilder by any means, right? And I never have claimed to be. But I'm generally pretty healthy. I still have some vices. Yes. I drink energy drinks.
Yes.
And I know they're not good for me. And I will never make an argument to anyone that they are.
Okay. So let's back up a second. I'm going to quiz you on a couple things.
Yes.
True or false? The nicotine causes heart disease.
No. False.
Correct. That's the correct answer. Nicotine does not cause the heart disease. What causes the heart disease?
The tar from the
tobacco. True or false? Nicotine causes cancer.
False.
Correct. True or false? Nicotine causes the lung disease.
False.
True or false? Nicotine improves brain performance.
False.
True.
Oh, it's true. Nicotine does improve brain performance. Well, it kind of gives you it gives you more focus.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
okay.
It increases the rate of. So think of nicotine.
Darn it. Yeah, I was staying with the false. I was going I'm going to ride this false to the grave here.
But you look at that comparison between nicotine and caffeine. Nicotine and caffeine are both stimulants.
Yes.
They both cross the blood-brain barrier. Nicotine is more potent than caffeine. One molecule gets you about 4 to 6 of what caffeine
making it why it's more addictive.
Yeah, why it's more addictive.
Okay.
But once they started, especially if they started in that developmental years of their brain performance, it's very difficult to get off of it. Even after that nicotine is a very difficult chemical to come off of, as is cocaine. So the access to cocaine is much less. Access to nicotine, it's out there. Yeah, it's easy.
Yep.
So I say that to say, when you say that energy drinks are bad for you, what's in your energy drink that you're worried is bad for you?
Words I can't pronounce.
Okay. Okay, the unknown, that might be fair.
Right? It's like I don't have a can in here, but if you look at the back of a Bang, right, or a Monster Energy or any of these, right, and I will drink, those are the two I typically will drink if they're in our fridge, right?
Sugar-free or not?
The zero, at least.
Okay.
I have the zero because I don't want any of the carbs.
Right. There you go. That's right.
That's right. I don't want the carbs. Watching my, but I'm like, listen, this is why I drink it. I like the way they taste.
Sure.
Mostly I prefer Monster. They do give me a bit of a perk. It's 100 milligrams of caffeine in a Monster, right? So that's about the equivalent of about a nice cup of coffee.
Right.
and I will have generally like one in the middle of the day.
Okay. So I'm going to give you a little less anxiety or relief to know that when you look at studies of how well an energy drink is impacting a person, if they are, especially if they are removing the sugar, the impact isn't as awful as what, like, it's not that bad. In fact, when you are looking at the delivery of sugar to no sugar, the sugar substitute, they're not my favorite things. It really ruins people's guts. I can trash on them if I needed to.
Sure.
But the truth is, it's a harm reduction. Having the sugary drink to get your energy, that causes pathology over time, increases weight, increases cancer, increases dementia rates, increases heart disease. All of that is an insulin enhancing or insulin growing process of those high carbs. When you have energy drinks that are got some caffeine in it.
Celsius is another one I like.
Oh, yeah?
The Celsius is the slim can with lots of different flavors. They've become huge in the last couple of years.
Okay.
And that's all everyone in this building drinks those. Everyone. I'm even ratting out every one of my team members right now who drink those. Yeah.
Well, as long as there's as it's not high in carbs.
No, there's no carbs. That's what makes them so accepted, I guess, in the world again of health and fitness, our industry, where healthy people will make claims or arguments that, oh, this is fine for me.
Right.
It's no sugar. It has vitamin B in it. How bad can it be? But if you can't pronounce 10 to 15 of the ingredients,
I do think they're overpriced. I think
they are overpriced.
Right.
Yeah.
So adding some caffeine and some vitamins and some carbonation with some sugar substitute. Okay, and that's not a bad thing. What I have recently been working with is my son's a wrestler.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
and so really good too, right?
It is the season, so we're excited, and he's got 138 is the new weight that I will think of until at least March 1st.
Wow.
That we make 138 every week. But so, and I am advising him and saying, okay, I don't want to blunt his growth or stop his hippocampus, and I want him to make weight. But I know that if you deny their calories enough or the fuel for their body enough, you'll find that they don't grow as tight of a long thick hippocampus. Okay, so I'm looking at brain development.
You want a long thick hippocampus for your son? I mean, you know what? Every mom should want that for their child. Okay.
Perfect. President, no, I'm looking at his hippocampus. And as he seeks advice from something that really is my expertise, and you say, okay, kid, here's what we can do to help you fuel your brain during the day, especially on a Friday. If we have to make weight by the next day, we need to drop 3 pounds. I don't want him spitting. I don't want him doing the heat suits and losing although people in the past have done that.
Yes.
Decreasing the calories that get stored while giving him the brain power to work in a classroom. So what would I advise him to take? I would say, yeah, caffeine, not a bad thing. I wouldn't tell him to have nicotine. Now, I have adults in the developed brain that say nicotine is not the worst enemy in the world. Just don't inhale it. There are a bunch of ways you can get the
chew it, stick it on your
lozenge. There's plenty of ways that you can use that nicotine to enhance your brain function. It's incredibly addictive, so I do warn against that. So the caffeine he could have. The sugar substitute would give him a little bit of sweetness. That would probably not be bad. But I would tell him to drink liquid ketones. So a ketone is a fuel. And again, your brain can use a fuel, that fuel. When you have a ketone in circulation, there are 2 options. Let's back up. When you have glucose, sugar in there, you can store it as fat. You can store it as glycogen, stored glucose. You can burn it. And if you get a whole bunch of glucose, you can turn them into fat. Okay, a ketone is not like that. You put a ketone in circulation, you either can burn it in the mitochondria, whether that's the mitochondria in your brain or your heart or whatever, or you pee it out. So it would not add to additional weight in this wrestler.
Right. It's not a stored source of energy.
Exactly. So you look at some of the enhancements that we have made to say, when I look at why I got on, this bandwagon of anti-THC. And again, it's really, I made sure all my sons, my kids, my schools that I was influencing had this information, and then have done my best to continue to educate without poking the hornet's nest, because it is that there's a lot of vitreous response to this.
There is.
But I think it's also helpful for people to hear that, as much as we can shame nicotine, there's actually pretty good evidence that it does increase your brain function. You should not use the carrying capacity of a tobacco. That's got all of the baggage with it. There are awesome advances that are coming in our world. One of those being, well, just swallow some ketones. It does really help you to deliver the energy. It lasts better than just the caffeine. The caffeine will change your sleep cycle over time. Mm-hmm. And that same problem where you have with THC, where at first a little bit worked and then you needed more, and then you do tap out with caffeine, giving yourself a caffeine break for 2-3 days without any. It hurts, but you can really reset the caffeine system.
No, I've definitely had like caffeine withdrawals and things before. I'm a coffee guy too in the morning, so it's a very real thing. The thing about caffeine, I know we're kind of like venturing into other
addiction
territory,
in general,
right? But it's all along the same line. And interesting is caffeine is more of a blocker than it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that what it's doing? It's actually blocking other things from being released, and that's where we get
a higher reuptake and inhibition in the whole sense of there's plenty of things in the body that do that too. So the stimulus part of it is when I'm teaching patients about it, I put it in the category of stimulus. The cellular function for how it works usually they get glassy-eyed.
They do, right? It's kind of like it gets too sciencey, right?
Right,
Yeah.
but that's why you can say it doesn't take long to reset with caffeine. It's okay to just give yourself a few days, take a caffeine holiday. And where I was going with this is to say when I get patients in that are trying to come off of marijuana, it's hard. It is a difficult journey. Their brain health is really compromised. I mean, those scans give you a little bit of an insight, but especially I wish I could, quickly recite the amount of data that's come out on mothers who use THC while pregnant. So
while pregnant, which is,
or
it's
nursing.
one thing if you're doing it prior to, and then you give it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you know you're pregnant, it's like, okay, I'm stopping, which it's still in your system for a little
3
while.
3 months. I'm telling you. Okay,
So that still has a negative consequences there.
Yeah. So, and it does cross the placenta. It does affect that baby. We know that in utero exposure to marijuana increases their depression rate at 10, decreases the full volume of the brain that develops. This is also impacted if the mom is using it while nursing because it's passed through the breast milk.
Absolutely, yep.
And so these are some of the places where you say, well, if life was perfect, I would say I want you to prepare for coming off of marijuana. We're going to start January 1st. In the meantime, I need you to cut down. And I would be doing other things like improving their sleep, introducing them to ketones as another way. That anti-inflammatory fuel in their brain really does help me improve that cellular brain repair faster if I can keep them in a state of ketosis. Even if they can't stay on the diet, I need them in ketosis. But there are times where the mom's baby is growing and I need you to stop right now. So rip that Band-Aid off in a hurry. The consequences are still very, they're significant on those children that are, and Colorado's data is where we learned that from.
Wow.
Again, it's not the study. It is a live experiment on the state of Colorado because of what they did. And from
I will link. Maybe you can email me some of these studies because I will link those in the show notes for anyone that's interested. Because this is fascinating information and controversial and all these things that we've been saying. I will link to some of these in the show notes so that people can get their eyes on this themselves and do some more learning. The other thing that kind of has been in the background of my mind the whole time is people's argument with marijuana oftentimes is that it's natural. It's just natural. It's a plant. We're supposed to be able to do this. Why is a natural thing that grows in the woods a bad thing for me to burn and smoke and ingest? Isn't it fine for my lungs to be breathing that in versus all the chemicals that are in a cigarette?
Yeah, I like to point out that arsenic is natural, cocaine is natural, tobacco is natural, opium plant is natural.
Mushrooms are natural, all of this stuff, right? Psychedelics and all that. Right. I'm going to have another conversation in the near future with a guy talking about psychedelics and stuff.
Well, The part that I hear the argument a lot is, well, I get it from my doctor, so it must be okay.
Right.
First of all, I would like you to poll how many doctors are able to practice medicine while under the influence of marijuana. Go across your country and see, well, is that allowed? The next part that I would have you look at is passing the baton to the physician team has not worked out well in the past. When we said, well, let's take alcohol, put that in a pill, and give it to doctors to prescribe. That's called benzodiazepines.
Wow.
We've known since before I went into high school that the longer somebody is on benzodiazepines, the higher the risk of dementia, and the decreased ability to repair their brain. The depression and dementia rates are they match exactly what happens with a chronic alcoholic and people who are on chronic benzodiazepines. This is Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, Valium, Librium. Those are benzodiazepines. That's booze in a pill that binds into that spot of the brain, right where alcohol does.
Wow.
The next thing that we have messed up is, well, what happens when you put heroin in a pill? Yeah, that's called OxyContin.
Wow.
And again, physicians have done a
That's gotten a lot of press in like the last decade, OxyContin.
Yeah, so our ability to regulate these really, not even controversial, just these really important drugs, which do have a powerful responsibility on how they are used in our community. But then the social network of, whether the opiate crisis was blamed on, the money making or the pharmacy or whichever person you want to blame for how bad it got. Well, physicians were a part of that. We were the ones writing the prescriptions. And to think that we are now going to have this banner of THC and do a great job with it, we have a terrible track record for regulating when a drug should be used, when it shouldn't. I really do point to the pillars in the research industry and say, when you look at the people who study it the most, how often do they use it?
Wow.
And I think that's a personal place where you hear the media. Before I had the blessing of being second in line to this guy showing me all this data and really helping me, kind of like you, I don't want to spend time learning about marijuana. I don't do it. I don't have, I tell patients to get off of it. Why would I want to know all this? And his infusion of information really inspired me to really learn more about it and make sure I had my facts straight. But once you kind of sit there saying, how do I juggle what's the right decision for me, for my kids? I would look at the people who I respect the most.
Yes.
And some of the best researchers out of Johns Hopkins, and they study brains and how brains work and how they repair and seizures. And I was watching one of their lectures, and there's very few people that would inspire me so much to just say, I would just listen to every word you say.
Wow.
And somebody in the crowd says, well, what do you tell the patients when they come in and they say, I want my kid to be on marijuana because it's supposed to help with their seizures? And his response was, I would tell them to go try that. And when you're done with that and you've riddled your son's brain further with holes, then bring him back to me and I will try again to show you how to heal them. And I just think it's, that really captured it as I, much like you, struggled with oh my gosh, all of this advertising, all of this, influence for the next generation of how it can't be that bad. And then as you get into the data, you're like, gosh, I feel like the only one that's talking about it. And then you see some of these, the giants who've really researched the brain, who've taken I pale in comparison to how well they understand the pathophysiology and the performance of the human brain. And those kinds of answers, kind of put a banner in my confidence to say, okay, I'm on the right path here. Which then inspired me to get all this ancillary information.
But this parallels so look at the giants in the social media industry. They don't want their own children on social media platforms because they know exactly what the goal is.
Amen.
The goal is to get you so addicted and so looped in and so drawn in that you cannot break out.
It's real. Yeah.
And it's the same thing as a drug or being addicted to something foreign.
Right.
And the same response. They don't want that for their own kids, but they'll gladly do it, obviously, because they're making millions of dollars each as higher ups in these big outfits. The Facebooks and the Instagram and Twitter and all of these, TikTok and all these people making boatloads and boatloads of money because they know exactly what they're going to get. They're going to get people who are glued for hours a day scrolling dopamine, dopamine, right?
Yep. And then over time, that pleasure point that's the only place they can find pleasure. There's a couple things I'll leave. I don't know how much time we have left, but
no, we're good. We'll wrap her up. Yeah.
All right. So there's a few things that when patients come to me and they're really saying, well, what would you tell your kids, or what is it that I had for the goal? As I said, my sons are now 16, 19, and almost 22. And as I looked at what motivated me to really take this into the middle schools, they couldn't listen to their mom, but when their mom was in front of the school, it was different. They could hear it.
Yes.
That as a developing brain should have several avenues of places where you draw pleasure. That you look at what is my dream, what was my prayer for my boys' development of their brain, is that the threads, when I get an addict at 18 years old who's highly addicted to, pick something. Alcohol and marijuana are very common combinations at that age, at this time. And they've got two threads in their brain that were delivering this pleasure sense or this dissociation. And now the other threads that they were supposed to have developed, they're the tiniest little like spider threads. And
wow.
And the marijuana is a number 9 wire, and the alcohol is twice that, based on how long they've been using.
Yeah.
And to say, now I have this morphed anatomy that needs to be reset. Wow. And unfortunately, when that development happens, that they have muted development of pleasure from friendships, pleasure from, food, which can be abused, pleasure from exercise, pleasure from, storytelling, acts of service, the other places in the brain that are
being artistic. Being active, being an athlete,
Absolutely.
Movement patterns of the body and mechanics and
Absolutely.
stuff. Like all of these things, you're detracting from them now, right?
Right. And the chances that they're going to feel pleasure from those as they develop later on is very low. The chances they're always going to feel pleasure from whatever was developed during those teenage years, it's why the discussion of pornography and marijuana and alcohol and social media come in to say, if this is where you feel great, you're going to depend on this for the rest of your life. And if you can just push off that, I tell when parents say, does that mean they never get to have alcohol? They never smoke a joint? And I'm like, well, just wait till their brain's developed and then ask the question. And what you really guaranteed is, even if they start drinking at 21 or 25 or somewhere in those mid to late 20s, the number of people stuck for decades in addiction, which is what have shuffled through my clinic over the last 2 decades, it is a life that is sacrificed so much because they are linked to that addiction, and it's a cross they'll bear till they die. And so to help them bridge through those very important years, I think the education about what marijuana is doing, how it works, really getting into the truth about, like, I tell my kids, nicotine's not something I want you to do. Here's how it works. I mean, you try to stick with truth and not just say, everything's terrible. You're never...
Right.
Right?
No, back up what you're saying and have some real, some real knowledge or some insight behind it. It can't just be a blanket statement and you're trashing something and you have no reason for it, no platform to stand on.
Right. And today they can Google and tell me, and argue with me. And I think that's the power that I've been super thankful for, is, really sticking that science motivated them. And I've got pretty good evidence to prove this was this is where we've landed. And some of my most proud moments as a mom were times where they would ask me about the slide that I had used to teach them, where, this teacher had been my patient, and the picture of his brain was riddled. He was an esteemed member of society. He was teaching the kids, and I bet him that his brain wasn't normal. And it was just one of those very powerful stories for kids to hold on to, saying, oh my gosh, somebody I look up to is doing something like that. Mm-hmm. And then they end up in a conversation between somebody's offering them a joint. I know that's what's happening. I can tell you by the hour and the age of their, development, this is what happened. And then they ask me, Mom, can you text me that picture? And that's like the best feeling, to say, even if they don't choose that right thing in the moment, if they end up, experimenting like many kids do, there was a chance where they didn't, because the education connected and they were able to at least have articulate why they weren't going to do that to their friends, which as a mom, that's a big win point for me.
Without question. I always kind of go back to when it comes to making decisions on things, what would I tell my kids? And if you don't have kids, what would you tell the kids in your neighborhood? You probably know some, right? And what would you like to see for them, for their future and for their life? Not a riddled brain that didn't get to develop and grow at its best potential.
Right.
And the big takeaway here is we want nice, big, beefy, long, thick seahorses inside of our brains. We want this hippocampus maxed out. We want the Michael Jordan hippocampus.
Amen.
I don't know one person who wouldn't want that, right? Because he's awesome because he achieved greatness in multiple areas of life, right? So he's somebody that has been idolized, obviously, and looked up to. And not that we should, idolize
but there's
people
you need
for
heroes.
but there's certain areas of his life where he's been the best and at the top level of achievement. And there's a reason behind that, right? And so I find it all so interesting. Thank you so much for just coming and hanging with your Alfie hat and necklace.
'Tis the season.
Yeah, 'tis the season, and this is so much fun. This is definitely a two-parter, okay, by a lot. And but I knew we had a lot to tackle, but it was fun. We went in different directions, and I just find it so valuable and so interesting. And I love your passion and your ability to take very complicated stuff and just make it very understandable.
Well, my hope is that the education, again, that was a rabbit hole of about 6 months. It took me to put all those slides together and really organize that. And so hopefully you share it with, I'd ask parents to watch it so you have the language to talk to your kids about it, because I do think the education of marijuana in the social space is not as clear, and it's really muffled. So parents, educate yourself, even if you're users or have been. Joe Rogan doesn't let his kids smoke marijuana either. He knows.
Interesting.
Right? And so the data is not without being very easy to find.
Yeah.
But some of the stories and the examples in that slide deck, it's an hour and a half long, but it will help you understand to a level that you can then transmit that to your kids, hopefully, when they ask the questions. So
phenomenal. Thank you so much. Where can they find you on? You have some platform. Your YouTube channel's huge. Has like 300,000 subs.
Yeah. Thanks.
That's great. So they just look up your name, right?
Yep, Dr. Boz. You'll find me on YouTube's probably the heaviest place that I put my energy into, and we have some Facebook stuff too. But bozmd.com is the place where you'll find our announcements, and there's if you want to follow along, I do a live show every Tuesday night, kind of looking at my journey of where am I at with a ketogenic diet? Where am I at with what I'm educating on brain repair, and how do I get the best health out of patients? And then I usually do some public speaking throughout conferences.
Yes,
throughout the year,
that's how I came to know of you. Yeah, and which has been great. And obviously the Higgins family and Hope Children's Home is a huge part of our lives here at Critical. But yeah, we're actually next week. So after this episode actually goes live. Wait, what? No, this episode goes live just like a week. So in 2 weeks, we are going there with, we go there every year with a huge truck filled with toys and special needs, and then people our staff who have not toured their 55-acre place go and tour. Yeah, anyone listening who've heard us talk about Hope Children's Home before, if you go back a year actually to a December 2021 episode, Mike and I sat down with Dr. Mike, and we talked with him about what he's doing and what Matt, obviously his son, is doing, and it's just wonderful, and you've become really close with them.
Yeah, you want to hear the best gift they gave me? That I had a prayer that I prayed probably about a decade ago when I stopped going to Haiti with my boys. My youngest son has been many times but had no memories. So when I heard they had a sister home in Honduras, I kept praying to say I was looking for a place to go serve with my son so he would have memories before he leaves high school about how do you serve in a third world country in a place where you can't come to my clinic and help me serve. That doesn't work. That's against the rules. But in a mission trip, you can help me. I can put you in charge of things. And he speaks Spanish. He was in a Spanish immersion school for the first 8 years of his education.
Wow.
So he was my voice while we served a medical mission in Honduras while staying at their sister location. So truly one of the best gifts since moving to Florida was the ability to honor that and have that moment. And I keep telling my husband, let's vacation back to Honduras.
Wow. How cool is that?
Yeah.
You and he will never, ever for the rest of your life forget how special that time was and the people that you helped.
It's true. Yeah.
What a cool bonding moment for a mom and son, right?
Right, yeah.
That's special. Well, thank you again. So great. Hope you listeners enjoyed this. So many takeaways, and go back and listen to it. Share it with some friends and family members. There's so much in this conversation. I'm sure you'll maybe bug some people, annoy people, piss people off. This could go a lot of different directions, but it's definitely worth sharing. And we just thank you so much for following the Strong by Design podcast, and we hope to see you back next week. As always, every single week we release a podcast, and the show just continues to get better and better. Hey, the New Year is almost here. Christmas is almost here. Enjoy it. Enjoy it with friends and family, and we'll be back soon enough. God bless.